Richard. So I wanted to know what you thought about national voting standards, because I think that's some of the issues that we're talking about is inconsistent among the states, and what you think the majority threshold should be.
National voting standards. We barely have national voting standards.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah, and that actually, that's an interesting way to think about this, because the national popular vote would, as we've said, preserve the Electoral College. We're one of the few only established democracies where we continue to administer every election at the level of the lowest local jurisdiction possible. So, I mean, Congress has moved towards trying to have national standards of voter records, voter registration stuff, use of provisional ballots and all these things, but there's still a long way to go. So I would like to see national standards. I have no model of how you do that and what standards in terms of
well,
administration.
Who gets to vote in each state, just like we talked about.
Yeah, and again, this is preserving either the Electoral College or the national popular vote is still done within that federal context. So we would have different polling hours in different states, different felon disenfranchised requirements in different states. That would take a huge statutory change or even constitutional change to probably come up with standards of that sort. And in terms of like, would you say the threshold, the popular threshold?
Yeah, majority threshold, what you think that should be.
Yeah, and if we're going to be talking about the reason for having a popular vote is to have somehow a more popular democratic selection method, I would think you'd want a majority. That's just me. Whether that's going to happen, that the popular vote system doesn't accomplish that unless you add on to it some other runoff voting scheme, or a multiple, 3 weeks between elections where you have a runoff or something.
Okay, Richard?
Yeah, I'm hearing two sides of this argument. The one downside about the one person, one vote, which doesn't work out when somebody in Wyoming's vote is worth 4 times as much as somebody in California. But then on this other side, I'm hearing that if it were a completely popular vote, or even down to congressional districts being carried, that the presidential candidates would just automatically go to the population centers and wouldn't have to go out to places where it's more contentious and have to earn the vote of the people. And I look at those two things side by side, and I was trying to see if there was something in between. So I want your take on what the outcome would look like if something like, more like the way legislative districts and congressional districts are, if they divided up California and New York into a couple of districts, and then bound together, Rhode Island with Connecticut, and New Hampshire with Vermont, and a couple, and Wyoming with Montana or something, so that the sizes of each of these areas to be carried were more similar, but it would still force the presidential candidate to have to go out to all sorts of different areas and actually earn the pre-approval of the people. What would your take be on something like that? How would that look?
Well, I'm not making light of what you're saying, but I would say I want to stay here in Cascadia. I believe that's what that region was called, but I don't know. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Well, this is, with a background in practical politics, this is one of the ways that I think about this question is, what would Karl Rove or James Carville or Rahm Emanuel do differently under a national popular vote system than what they've done under the Electoral College? This is that's an important thing to think about, right? That's how this would actually work. And I did some research. I went to the census website and determined that if you go down the list of cities from the largest city, working your way down, the 40 largest cities have half of the U.S. population in them. And that's where those political strategies would start, is by looking at, the cost of a vote, in the crass terms that political consultants all use, the cost of a vote is less the more population density you have, right? It's much easier to organize politically in areas that are more dense. And so that's where you would start, and you would work out as little from the urban cores as you could, because it's the most efficient use of your money. And I think that if you, it's obvious, if you broke this down, you looked at nationally at what that would look like, and you drew circles around the urban areas and how far out candidates would rationally go. And maybe for candidates on the Republican side, it would look more like a donut or something, but it's still going to be centered around urban areas because that's the logical thing to do. then you would see that under the Electoral College, right, where you're forced to go campaign in Florida or Iowa, or you're forced to focus your campaign on a few of those most evenly divided states, you are going to be going out further from the urban areas. You're forced to do that. And a lot of this just comes down to raw incentives on those kind of people. Rahm Emanuel, Karl Rove. They're going to make the decisions about how this is going to work in practice. We better think about how they're going to try to gain the system to their advantage.